Namaste, and thank you for inviting me again to Sangam Talks, and thank you all for being so interested to listen to this conversation. This is going to be a difficult talk for me to deliver. It will be easier for you as a listener. So, up front, I would like to say that this is not a topic that I can comprehensively cover in an hour or two. So, I would request that each of you who are listening make your own journey to understand this in more depth. You can read, of course, my book Rutu Vidya, but more than that, the books and the texts that are used as references in Rutu Vidya, which I have mentioned with each chapter, do try and study those books as well to get a more in-depth and comprehensive understanding of this subject. The burning questions in the minds of a lot of women today, I will try and point us in the direction in which to look for answers to these questions. So, what are these questions? The first and foremost question with not just women, especially young girls, when I go to schools to do sessions, the first question is, am I so impure during my period that even the devatas don't want to see me? Why are women who are menstruating told not to visit temples during that time? The other related question is, why are menstruating women told not even to touch or receive the prasadam during their period? Right? So going to the temple, a lot of women try to understand it. But what about the prasadam? That's something you eat. You can have that, right? And then there are those who say that, well, in the ancient days, there were no sanitary napkins and other products. But today we have it. So it is okay. If you can wear these sanitary napkins and go to the temple, it's okay. So is that the correct way of understanding it? If not, what is the correct way? So we will explore that. There are some mantras which are women are told not to recite or to recite in a different way. Why is that rule in place? Why is that regulation there? And then there are temples like Shabrimala and certain mokshadams where even if the woman is not menstruating at the time of the visit, but if she is of the menstrual age, between the age of around 10 to 50 years, she is told not to visit that particular temple. So, how do we understand that? How do we make sense of all of these rules? Was it just a way that our ancestors came up with to suppress women because we are so patriarchal, as is unfortunately spoken at times? Or is there more to it? These will be the questions that we will try and look at in some depth, whatever the time permits today. Okay? So, when I went out in search of these answers, this was about 5 or 6 years ago, I started by sending an email to all the popular mutts and all the popular spiritual masters of the time. So I've written to all of them saying, can you please help me understand this? Can you give me an appointment for an interview where I can discuss this and, I can learn from you? Nobody replied. Finally, there was only one person, one Guruji who replied. And he's the one who started me on this journey and pointed me in the direction to look for these answers. He's the Guruji of Devipuram. His name is Sri Amritananda Nath Saraswati. And he founded the Devipuram temple, which is very close to Vishakhapatnam or Vizag in Andhra Pradesh. So the beauty of this temple is that this temple itself is like a 3D structure of the sacred Sri Vidya, of the sacred Sri Chakra. And Guruji himself was a top nuclear physicist from this country who later took to studying and teaching the Sri Vidya. So he is someone who understands the idea and the concept of the divine feminine, both through the text as well as through his own experience of it. So the entire construction of the Devipuram temple, for example, was something that Devi spoke to him, appeared to him in his dreams and told him, and he just went along doing it the way she instructed. So that is the kind of person that Guruji was. And I had the good fortune to meet him in early 2015. So my question to him was very straightforward. I said, Guruji, why is it that women in our country are told that they are impure and should not visit a temple when they have their period? So I'll tell you what he told me. He said, what is pure, we do not touch. And what we do not touch, we call it a taboo. So menstruating women are so pure that they were requested to not enter a temple. Because if a woman who is in her period approached the Vigraha or the Murti, the life that is there in the Murti moves over to her. And then that becomes lifeless. It becomes a mere stone while she becomes the Devi. And this is the reason why women are told to not go to a temple when they have their period. And it has nothing to do with women being impure. In fact, it is the complete opposite. So, this is what Guruji had told me. It's almost very close to his exact quote, which I have written in my book. So, how do you understand this? You know, if I say this to young girls, and they would get very excited and say that, oh, I can be like the Devi, then I should go to the temple when I have my period. Right? That's not the right way of understanding it. So there are two things that come to mind when we think of this. One is it gives us some understanding of why women were told not to approach or go near a Vigraham during a temple. And if you see in temples where they have found that a menstruating woman has gone, there are a series of rituals that they do, like the Abhishekam, different types of it, to restore the Chaitanyam that has been lost because of her presence, because of her absorbing the life energy that is there. And the other question that we should ask, that should come to our mind, is what happens to the woman? Is a human being, a woman in this form, capable of taking on that sort of a Chaitanyam? And what sort of an impact will it have on her health? This is the major question which we need to try and understand and answer. So, how do we look for these answers? Or rather, which is the book that will give us some clues, at least, if not the full answer? So I started by studying Ayurveda books, and that answered a lot of questions pertaining to the other menstrual restrictions which I have spoken about in my previous talk. But Ayurveda did not have a single mention about this thing of not visiting the temple during periods. And I always had this question: is how come this most popular and this most common practice is not addressed in the Ayurveda books? I got the answer to that question when I began studying the Agama Shastra texts and the books pertaining to Tantra. You see, the temples as we know them today were a result of the Agama Shastras and the Tantra, which were not the Shastras of the time when Ayurveda was written. That brings us to the question of, is there such a thing as a Shastra pertaining to a particular yuga? And if so, what is the Shastra for our present time, for the Kali Yuga? So the Tantra books, the Kularnava Tantra, it's one of the very popular Tantra texts. So that particular text talks about how for every yuga, there is a particular version of the Shastra that is prescribed. So it is said that for the Satya Yuga, when a lot of people had the capacity for greater realization and the rishis could go into states of samadhi, there the original truth, the reality, appeared to them in the form of the Shrutis. And that is what the Vedas are. So for the Satya Yuga, the Vedas, the Shrutis are the Shastras. Then the next Yuga, the Treta Yuga, had fewer people who had that capacity for going into samadhi, and it became a little more difficult. So then the same teachings contained in the Vedas had to be simplified a little bit. And therein came the Smritis, that which was remembered by the rishis and written down for people. So the Manusmriti and all the others, they come under that yuga. After that came the Dwapara Yuga, where still further the human capacity for self-realization is said to have diminished. So even the Smritis had to be simplified. So they came up with the beautiful idea of the Puranas and the Itihasa, which contain the teachings of the Vedas itself, but in a form of stories that people could understand. But if you think of them as mere stories, then we'll be totally missing the point, because every story in the Purana has extremely deep and beautiful understanding of the ultimate truth contained in the Vedas itself. Then came our time, the Kali Yuga. So here, if someone spoke of the Shruti, it would not be understood properly. The Smritis were not followed. The Puranas were misinterpreted very often. So we had to do something that was even more simple for a time when the human capacity for self realization was at its absolute lowest. Not only that, it is said that for people in the Kali Yuga, more than mukti, more than the pursuit of mukti, bhukti, or the pursuit of worldly pleasures, became more important, and we all see this around us, right? So, when the human mind is so engaged in material pursuits, how do you still get them to walk towards mukti? And that is when the Tantra Shastra came up with methods and means wherein the humans in the Kali Yuga can also access the very teachings of the Vedas and walk towards mukti. There are many ways in which Tantra has done it, and the two crucial things in Tantra Shastra for a person to be able to pursue the path of moksha is a guru. Without a guru, without being initiated by a guru, without being taught and guided by a guru at every step, it is very difficult to pursue the path of Tantra. And the second thing that Tantra requires is sadhana. Sadhana is constant and continuous effort of the teachings and whatever the guru tells you to do it in a disciplined manner for a sustained period of time. So these two things, without a guru and without a sadhana, it is very difficult to understand what Tantra is. In fact, one of the beautiful books on Tantra, which I would recommend those who are interested to read, called the Tantra Tattva. It is written by a Bengali scholar of Tantra called Pandit Shivachandra Vidyarnava. He writes that the reason why Tantra Shastra has been so misunderstood or not even understood is because it is a sadhana shastra. So majority of tantra can only be understood when you experience it, when you do the sadhana and you are able to experience the goal of the sadhana. That is when tantra shastra will start making sense. Otherwise, it will be very difficult to comprehend what is written in the tantras. In spite of that difficulty, I'm going to attempt to explain a few things. Uh, Again, my own understanding has come by my experience of temples and the way it has an influence on the human body, especially women in the menstruating age. But it's not just my experience that I have learned from. After my first book, many women have shared with me similar experiences that they have had in temples, and I have written and expressed their experiences also in my book, Rutu Vidya. So, what I'm going to share with you now is grounded in the knowledge of Tantra Shastras to whatever extent I was able to study. And in a bigger way, it is grounded in my experience of how Hindu temples can have an impact on the human body. So, the book which explains how a Hindu temple is constructed and what are the processes that happen there, which makes it so different from other buildings, that text is called the Agama Shastras. So, the Agama Shastras talk about how it is to be constructed, where do you place the Vigraham, what is to be done to the Vigraham before placing it. And one of the beautiful things that I learned in these books was that the way the temple is conceptualized, it is not that you think of the architecture first and how to build the building and then you put a deity, a vigraham there. No, that's not the way it is done. The first decision that is made is about the deity itself. Who is the devata shakti who will reside there? And it can be a swayam vyakta, that is a self-manifest form like we see in temples like Kamakhya. It can be something which has been installed by the sages, like we see in the many temples of Kerala and Shabrimala of Parashurama and Agastya Muni, who have gone and installed it themselves. Or it is the more recent temples, or Manushya Devalayas, which we call it, where in more recent times humans have done the processes and the techniques and brought life into the Vigraham. But in all these, the key thing is that the Vigraham itself, the Devata Shakti itself, that is considered as the soul, as the Atman. And then the temple is built as a body for that soul. So it is the Vigraham that comes first, and to support the nature of that Vigraham, the Chaitanya there, a temple is constructed as a body, as an extension of that. This is the fundamental understanding of a Hindu temple. Now, there is a technique in the Agama Shastras, and it is called the Prana Pratishtha. Very often in English, we translate it as consecration. So, in the Western concept, consecration today has come to mean something which is symbolically sacred. Okay, symbolically sacred. But the idea of a prana pratishtha is far from being merely symbolic. Prana pratishtha is a technique wherein any object or a space is brought into life by imbuing prana in it. So this is done by a priest by following the techniques mentioned in Agama Shastras. And the very important thing here is the sankalpam, the intention with which the prana pratishtha is done, and that decides the nature of the chaitanyam. The chaitanyam is that which is present in a temple by virtue of the technique of prana pratishtha. So you may have the same deity in multiple temples, but the Chaitanyam could be different in every one of them. And the reason is the way in which the Prana Pratishtha is done. In addition to that, the nature of the Sankalpa. So that is why we have so many Ayyappan temples, but not all of them have the same rules and regulations as Shabrimala. Shabrimala is different from the other Ayyappan temples. Like that, you take any deity, the rules and regulations are based on what was put in there and the nature of that. So only the Pandit who did the initial Prana Pratishtha will truly know what he put in there. And the rules and the regulations that he gives should not be tampered with, because those regulations are intended to maintain the Chaitanyam based on the Sankalpa he put in there. And we must be very, very careful before we try to modify or tamper with those rules. Okay? So there are elaborate ways on which a temple is built. There is the drawing known as the Vastu Purusha Mandala, in which you have a human-like form lying down. And the temple is said to be constructed similar to resemble the human body itself, from the entrance being similar to the feet of a person lying down, to the place where the seat of the icon is being equivalent to the space between our eyebrows. Now, the way the temple is, there are drawings that show you that it is equal to that of a human body, and they show you connections with what we call as chakras. Now, if we have to understand how the ancient Hindu temples impact the human physiology, then we need to have some knowledge of the chakras. If you have bhakti and you're able to experience that, it is perfectly fine. But unfortunately, when things go to the court and we are asked to explain why women should not enter temples like Shabrimala, or why do these rules exist, then we need these knowledge systems to give us the language with which we can explain it. And that is why, for this particular purpose, we need to have some knowledge of the chakra system of human anatomy. The whole difference between modern medicine and our indigenous medical sciences is that in our native sciences, whether it is Ayurveda or Tantra or chakras, in addition to understanding the physical anatomy, which we call the Sthula Sharira, we also excelled in the knowledge of the subtle anatomy, which is the Sukshma Sharira. Okay? So now in the physical anatomy, we all recognize that there are nerves. There are points where these nerves join, and we call these as plexus points. Similarly, in the Sukshma Sharira, we have nadis. Nadis are not visible to the naked eye. These are subtle channels. We have nadis, and points where several nadis come together and meet. Those junctions are called as chakras. So there are more than 100 chakras in the body. There are several minor chakras. But there are 6 major chakras that are aligned along the spinal column, which we refer to as the Shat Chakras or the six chakras. One of the books I would recommend if you want to know more about this is the Shat Chakra Nirupana text. This is a very ancient text. There are English translations available. It will explain each of the chakras, the deity residing in each chakra, the qualities associated with each chakra, and so on. You can read this for more information. For our purpose, we need to have some idea of how particular temples can impact the human body through one or more chakras, and how these chakras in turn affect the particular vayus operating in that region. And the chakras are also capable of influencing the endocrine glands in the regions where the chakras are operating. And the knowledge of the endocrine glands will help us explain and articulate this in the language of modern medicine. So I will try this very difficult explanation by talking about each chakra, telling you the associated vayu and the endocrine gland, and giving you some idea of how it impacts the human system. Okay. So let us start with the chakra, which is considered as the lowest chakra in the human body among the major chakras. Now, this chakra is located just below the genitals at the base of the spinal column, and it is called the Mooladhara chakra. The Mooladhara chakra. In terms of Vayu, the Mooladhara chakra works on the Apana Vayu. Apana Vayu is a force within us. It is a subtype of the Vata dosha, which is responsible for all our downward moving processes. So the flow of the menstrual blood, the birthing of a child through normal delivery, the removal of the waste and the toxins in the form of urine or feces, the release of the semen, all of these downward moving activities within the human body are governed by the Apana Vayu. And the Mooladhara chakra is capable of influencing this Apana Vayu. Now, for any puja or any kind of a religious ritual, we begin by invoking Lord Ganesha. And Ganesha is said to reside at the Mooladhara. So for any spiritual process, you have to start by activating the Mooladhara chakra. That is your very first chakra. So they say that when your Mooladhara is not sufficiently energized, you will face a lot of difficulties in basic survival processes. The whole idea of roti, kapada, and makan, that is basic things that you need to survive, that will become a struggle if the Mooladhara is not functioning well. You will be ridden with disease, you will have financial trouble. A lot of these, problems, these struggles will happen when the Mooladhara is not sufficiently energized. And that is why we begin by activating the Mooladhara, by invoking Lord Ganapati in the Mooladhara for any spiritual process. See, one thing we should understand, when there is a basic struggle for life itself, we cannot talk about the higher spirituality. We have to first address that. And one of the ways in which we beautifully did this is by installing temples of Grama Devata. Every temple in India that I know of, that I have been to, has this concept of a village deity, a Grama Devata. So in Karnataka, we have Renuka Yellamma. In Tamil Nadu, we have Mariamman temples. So all these village deities, they largely operated on activating your Mooladhara chakra, so that day-to-day life will not be a struggle. Okay, so this is the first and the foremost thing. Above the Mooladhara chakra is the Swadhisthana chakra. Swadhisthana chakra resides in the region of the reproductive organs, and it has a major influence on our reproductive health, on our menstrual health, on fertility. Swadhisthana chakra influences all of that. If the Swadhisthana chakra is not sufficiently energized, our reproductive organs will not be sufficiently will not have enough prana. That is the way in which we understand it. And if our organs don't have enough prana, eventually they become dysfunctional. So the Devi temples associated with fertility, we have seen many of these temples. These primarily operate from the region of the Swadhisthana chakra. So those who have problems and menstrual difficulties, often if they visited these temples pertaining to Devi, especially Devi and fertility, then they experience a certain healing. Uh, this is not faith, this is not superstition. This is the direct experience of the devotees who have been to these temples. And one example where even I have experienced this is the Chenganur Bhagavati temple in Kerala, in Chenganur, where the entire aspect is that Devi menstruates and her menstruation is a big celebration. So when I visited the Chenganur temple, and I've written about this multiple times, I experienced a shift in my own menstrual cycle. And that shift made it a lot more healthier, a lot more smoother and easier, even as an experience. When I spoke to the devotees who were coming to the Chenganur temple and I asked them, why is this temple popular? The repeated answer that I got was that if any of us have problems pertaining to menstruation or infertility, Amma will solve the problem. So they may not know these things of chakras and all of these technical terms, but they know it through their experience. Either they or someone in their family has directly experienced this. I know of women who have struggled with a difficult pregnancy. And during the 7th and 8th month, when they were having so much difficulty, they went to the Chenganur temple and how that eased the whole process. So temples which work on the Swadhisthana chakra have immense capacity of helping us recover from menstrual and reproductive health issues because they work on our reproductive organs directly. Swadhisthana chakra is also associated with the same apana vayu. So by this you should know that for women in the reproductive health, the two most important chakras are the Swadhisthana chakra and the Muladhara chakra. If those are not sufficiently energized, if those are not active and those do not have enough prana, it will directly impact our reproductive health. Now, the third chakra from below that we must understand is the Manipura chakra. The Manipura is located in the region of the navel. And it's a very interesting chakra because it has two contrasting capabilities based on the path that you are chosen. So, if we have to broadly divide the way we live our lives, one is the Pravriti Marg, the path where we are in pursuit of worldly and material pleasures. And the other is the Nivritti Marg, in the path where we are working towards moksha, the spiritual path. So based on whether you are in the Pravritti Marg or the Nivritti Marg, the Manipura chakra will act differently for you. Similarly, temples that work on the Manipura chakra, based on whether the sankalpam is for Pravritti or Nivritti, they will have a different impact on you. So one of the things is that the Manipura chakra, that region, it works on the pancreas and the adrenal glands. And there is a temple in Tamil Nadu called the Venni Karumbeshwar temple, I hope I pronounced it right, where the belief is if you are suffering from diabetes, if you visit this temple, you will have a relief from that problem. And it's a very popularly known for this. The reason is that it probably works on the Manipura chakra, which in turn influences the pancreas and the adrenal glands, which in turn have an important role in regulating blood sugar. Okay? So these are the reasons why so many temples get associated with health, with fixing certain health disorders. Okay, so in the Pravritti Marg, the Manipura chakra is pretty much the highest you can go in terms of material gains. If you see the Western world, they talk of success and extreme success, which is material success. And that happens when the Manipura chakra becomes very energized and very active for you. So people who talk about success in terms of material wealth, the highest they go is the navel. Okay, so that's the highest. In the Hindu tradition, that was not considered as the ultimate. The Manipura chakra is the stepping stone to cross over to the other side, to the real success, to pursue the path of moksha. Because in the Hindu tradition, we understand that the purpose of human birth, why are we born as humans, is that we can fulfill the purpose of moksha. And that is why even the Devatas, even the Gandharvas, all of the celestial beings also crave a human birth because it's only through a human body that you can realize the purpose of moksha. So, for a Hindu, the real life starts after the Manipura chakra. So, till then, it's basic existence and basic survival. You reach the Manipura, and in the Nivritti Marg, that is the place where you will develop a sense of Vairagyam. Now, Vairagyam is not your cold detachment. Vairagyam means things will happen for you, but you are not associating your ego and your self identity to it. So I'm not concerned about will my book do well? Oh, if it does well, okay, it is my doing. You leave the fruits of your work to a greater will, and you just keep doing your work, and you're happy with that. So in the Shabrimala tradition, one of the temples that chakra is something you can experience so severely that that flavor of vairagyam, it will happen for you, and without you realizing it, you will become in a certain way blissfully detached from material pursuits. Okay, so that is something that happens now. When I visited the Kamakya temple, and I've written about that in Rutu Vidya, one of the rules is that before you visit Kamakya Devi, you must first go and do your pranams to Sri Umananda. And there is the Umananda temple, that is a temple of Lord Shiva, which is about 8 kilometers away in a river island of the Brahmaputra. The rule says that you must first go to Umananda temple and then go to Kamakya. Until I visited that place, I could not understand why that rule exists. You see, Kamakya temple and Ma Kamakya is all about fulfilling desires. It has so much to do with menstruation because Devi is in the form of a yoni there. There is no other Vigraham or Murti. There is a natural formation, and that is the formation of a yoni, and that is what is worshipped and the puja is done. And the Swadhisthana chakra is very prominent there. One of the things that happens with the Swadhisthana chakra is the fulfillment of desires. So all kinds of desires get fulfilled through the Swadhisthana chakra. And when you go to a temple where that concept, that sankalpam, that chaitanyam is so predominant, there are chances that we humans get carried away in the pursuit of bhukti and forget all about mukti. So to balance that aspect, there is the Umananda temple. When I visited the Umananda temple, very prominently, I could feel a throbbing sensation in the region of the entire solar plexus. That is the region of the Manipura chakra. It was like, I felt that if someone put their hand on my abdomen, they can also feel it. It was like this beating of a heart, except that it was in this vertical line along the solar plexus. That is how prominent you can experience what these chakras are. In fact, my knowledge of these chakras, apart from the books that I read, a lot of it is because in certain temples, I was able to experience the throbbing sensation in the region of the chakras. And that is how I could verify a lot of these things that I read. So that happened to me at the Umananda temple also. So that's the Manipura chakra. The Manipura chakra acts on the Samana Vayu. This is also a subtype of the Vata dosha. The Samana Vayu plays very important role in digestion and assimilation of your food. So whatever you eat, the process of digestion, if it has to begin, the Samana Vayu has to come into play. Now, we all know that with respect to visiting temples, the rule is not just for menstruating women. There are regulations for all devotees. And one of those regulations is to go on an empty stomach. You're not supposed to have a stomach full of food and then go to a temple. You can understand that regulation by understanding how temples like the ones that work on the Manipura chakra, if you are not on an empty stomach, if you've already eaten food, your Samana Vayu is supposed to work to digest it. But when you go to a temple, all these Vayus will work in a different way. It will, if it's a temple that works, especially if it's a temple that works towards moksha, then the direction of these Vayus will turn towards your higher chakras itself. And your day-to-day processes of digestion, of assimilating the food, of preparing it for excretion, all that will get disturbed. I and others who I know who have gone to temple on a stomach full have experienced this firsthand. you will have an upset stomach when you eat so much food and then go to a temple, especially a temple that works on the Manipura chakra. And that is why the rule exists that to go on an empty stomach. But the way we plan temple visits, it's like some sort of a schedule and an item to be checked off a list. So we'll have food here, we'll go here, and then we'll go to the temple, then we'll go to the next place. That's not how temple visits should ideally be planned. And it is always better to follow the regulations. The regulations are not merely symbolic. It is not just about some respect. In fact, the way Tantra Shastra is that it does not require you to have faith. Faith will come as a result of your experience of it. But you must follow these regulations that are there for each temple if you have to have a genuine experience of it. That is more important than having the faith itself as a first priority. Further from the Manipura chakra, when we go up, what we have is the chakra associated with the region of the heart called the Anahata chakra. From here onwards, the qualities are also largely associated with the Nivritti marg, the spiritual path. And the Anahata chakra and the region of the heart. One of the temples where you can experience this in a profound way are the temples of Durga and Kali. So I visited many beautiful temples of Bhadrakali in Kerala. And there's so many of them, and each one is so you cannot miss the vibrations in those regions, and your heart will start throbbing so incessantly. These are the temples that work on the Anahata chakra. And why is Durga and Kali residing there? Because they strike at the root of fear. They free you from fear. And when you become free of fear of what people will think, when you stop associating yourself with that ego and that self-identity, you become free to express kindness. See, today we understand kindness as a very diplomatic being nice to others. It's more to show that you're kind, not that you're genuinely kind. But when your Anahata chakra is active, kindness becomes effortless. That is what we mean. An effortless thing. It's not that you are struggling to diplomatically be nice to someone. It is the only way you know to be. It's very natural for you to be kind, very natural for you to become that for others, to become the one who helps others fulfill their wishes. And there are people who are like that, to whom, no matter how much hatred you throw, what will come from them will always be love and kindness. There are people like that. And you will know in their presence that these are the people who are operating from the Anahata, because it's so effortless for them to be kind. It's not a mental or intellectual process at all. It comes from the heart, it comes from the Anahata. That is the Anahata chakra. And Anahata chakra onwards, you are dealing with the more subtler and subtler aspects. As you go higher to the Vishuddhi chakra at the throat, that is considered as the door for moksha. So you can do all these practices and somehow reach till here. But beyond here, you cannot go without the grace of a guru. That's what they say. So the Vishuddhi is the door. And once the door is opened and you go higher, it often becomes easier to pursue a lot of these things with the grace of a guru. When the Vishuddhi chakra is triggered or active, a lot of creative things will start to manifest. People who are into classical music, very naturally they have a spiritual bent, if you observed. Even someone who's not a Hindu like Yeshudas will gain those spiritual aspects because they are using the Vishuddhi chakra so much. They're operating out of the Vishuddhi chakra, and very naturally they have that spiritual process in them, those who are into classical music. And once you go higher from the Vishuddhi is the chakra between the eyebrows called the Ajna chakra. Ajna is your command center. This is where you receive the commands from the Guru. If anything has to happen for you in the spiritual path, the Guru communicates with you through the Ajna chakra. Even when you look at the knowledge of the modern medicine, this is the region of the pituitary gland. And that is the command center for all the entire endocrine system. For any of your hormonal activities to start, it starts from here. It starts from the hypothalamus giving the signal to the pituitary, and from there the hormones getting released, right? So this Ajna is associated with that, the key, the main command center. People who are very active in the Ajna chakra will be very natural leaders, especially spiritual leaders and spiritual masters. Somehow they will attract the crowd. They have that natural command. They have exceptional analytical ability, a higher intelligence, the capacity for understanding a lot of things. And all of this happens when the Agnya chakra is triggered. This is a very fundamental understanding of the chakras and its correlation with the endocrine glands. Now, let us come to the question itself. One by one, let us see how we can answer these questions through this understanding. The first question that we will take up: why are women who are menstruating told not to visit these temples at the time of menstruation? At the time of menstruation, the apana vayu, which works in your Muladhara and Swadhisthana chakra, is throughout active because the blood flow is throughout for the duration of your period, right? It doesn't come and stop. For 3 or 4 or 5 days that a woman menstruates, the apana vayu is constantly active and constantly working in the downward direction to release your menstrual blood. When you are like that, if you visit one of the temples which work on any of the 3 lower chakras, whether it is of Muladhara, Swadhisthana, or Manipura, it will over trigger the Apana Vayu, which is already triggered. And one of the consequences could be that women will bleed excessively. There will be heavy menstrual bleeding because the Apana Vayu is over triggered. These very temples that will help to fix your apana and correct problems in it during non-menstrual times are not to be visited during menstrual times because the apana is already doing something and you must not interfere with it. Okay, so one of the beautiful stories that is there associated with the Chenganur Bhagavati temple, which clearly works on the Swadhisthana chakra because of its association with menstruation, is the story of this British officer called Thomas Munro. So apparently his wife had excessive bleeding and he was someone who used to dismiss this whole thing of Devi menstruating and said it's all superstition. And he had stopped the grants to the temple for, doing the festival. And they say as a consequence, his wife started bleeding severely. And he took her to all kinds of doctors and they could not find a cure. Finally, the archakas in the temple prescribed certain practices and methods. And after that, his wife became better. And in order to thank the temple and Devi Bhagavati, apparently even today, a golden bangle is sent by the Munro family to the temple whenever the festival is being celebrated. So, these stories are there associated with every temple. They're not symbolic. They point to a deeper understanding of it. For me, this story was that clear indication of what will happen when you break the rule and visit a temple that you're told not to go when you have your period. So if these temples that work on your lower chakras, if you visit them during your period, it could affect you in different ways. One of the things that I know through experience is that you may have heavy menstrual bleeding. Now, if you visited temples that have to do with moksha, that work on the higher chakras, and if at that time of your visit you are menstruating, then you can picture this, that the downward moving apana vayu will be forced to change its direction and move upwards. Because like apana vayu, you have prana vayu which operates in your higher regions. And the whole path of moksha is to activate and trigger this prana vayu. And in turn, it will pull all your other vayus, all the others also upwards. So if you visit a moksha dham when you're having your period, then you will experience it. If you are perceptive to those experiences, you will experience it as a severe cramping sensation. It's as if you're being twisted and pulled into different ways because in fact you are. The apana, which is supposed to be going down, is twisted and made to turn in the other direction. And this is why there is a possibility that a condition called endometriosis, where the menstrual blood flow itself is reversed, could happen by exposing yourself to such spaces repeatedly month after month. See, endometriosis is a condition which the modern doctors do not know why it happens, but the symptoms are that they found deposits of the endometrial lining, which is the lining of the uterus. They found deposits of that as high as the heart and the lungs. So your vayus had turned upwards, your menstrual flow, instead of going down, it was going into the abdomen and further up. It's an extremely painful condition. I wouldn't even wish it on my enemy. And this could happen if you tampered with these subtle energies, subtle forces that happen within your body when you go to temples during your period. So you see, it completely is illogical to say that wearing a sanitary napkin is enough and you can go to any temple. Unless your sanitary napkin magically keeps your apana vayu in check, it has no bearing on how the temple will impact you. These oversimplified conversations, we need to be done away with this, and we need to understand the real reasons from our own shastras and traditions as to why women were told not to go to temples. Now, the second question. So we can understand quite clearly that okay, if a woman is menstruating, apana is active, and it can either over trigger the apana or reverse its direction, and that is why she's told don't go to the temple when you menstruate. The second, and this has to do with the prasadam. So anything kept in the temple, in a place where prana pratishtha has happened, it bears that same chaitanyam. And when you consume or partake of that, even if it is a kumkumam or the prasadam, the impact will be same. And that is why during menstruation, you are told don't wear the kumkumam, don't receive the prasadam, because all of these things are capable of. Otherwise, why do we give so much respect to a prasadam? Now, the same thing we'll cook normally also in the kitchen. Why do we give it so much importance? Because it contains that chaitanyam of the temple where the prana pratishtha has happened. And that is why even that is part of the regulation. Okay. Now, the second question. Why is it that women of menstrual age, they may not be menstruating at the time of the visit, but if they are of that age, why should they not visit certain moksha dhams? And Shabrimala is one of those moksha dhams where they have clearly spelt out and said women between ages of 10 to 15 years should not go. And I'm so glad that they have spelled it out, because in the other moksha dhams, it is not written so obviously. And those who know it, and others are risking their reproductive health. One of the women who shared her story with me, she told me how she went to the Amarnath Yatra. And she is a woman of menstruating age. And she was supposed to get her period around that time. Not only did she not get her period, for 3 months after that, her period had stopped. And all these yatras, these tirth yatras, in the ancient days, it was understood women only went there after menopause. But today they have become like tourist spots, and we are promoting it like a tourist spot. It is not a place to be taken lightly. If you are pursuing the path of moksha for women, your body will help you in that after menopause, and it is to be done at that time, not before. She went for one visit to Amarnath Yatra, and a period did not come for 3 months after that. Imagine for those residing around these moksha dhams. Imagine the women who reside around Shabrimala. For them, Shabrimala is, and the Ayyappa is their daily deity. They go there every day. If you remove that restriction and tell them anyone can go at any time, imagine the sort of impact it will have on them, on long-term impact. So now I want to try and explain to you how is it that moksha dhams have this impact of actually stopping women's menstruation itself. Now, moksha dhams work on your higher chakras, especially your Agnya chakra, because from there and above that is the seat of consciousness, which we call the Sahasrara chakra. The Agnya chakra is deeply associated with your endocrine glands, which is the pituitary gland. In those who are in the reproductive age, both men and women, the pituitary glands are the other glands where your reproductive, especially for women, the menstrual cycle starts from there. We think it has to do with the uterus, but the trigger is always from here, from the pituitary. Okay, so when there is the gonadotrophin releasing hormone, GnRH it is called, when that is released, the pituitary in turn releases two hormones. One is called the LH or luteinizing hormone, and the other is called the FSH or the follicle stimulating hormone. Now, this LH or the luteinizing hormone is released both for men and women when the Agnya chakra or the pituitary gland is triggered. And LH will result in the formation of the hormone which we call testosterone. Now, testosterone is known as a male hormone. So in men, it's very good for their health, and men require testosterone. In women, testosterone peaks just before the ovulation and for a very small quantity. Definitely not as much as it is for the men. For a much smaller quantity, we have short peaks of testosterone. In women, it helps in muscle strengthening, it helps in sexual libido, and we need testosterone, but in very small quantities. In fact, it is this testosterone which your ovaries and adrenal glands will eventually convert into estrogen, which is your female hormone. Okay, so testosterone is needed for the female body, but in very small quantities. Now, in a healthy woman whose ovaries are working normally, when LH is converted into results in testosterone, your ovaries will start to process that testosterone to form estrogen. And when your estrogen will reach its peak at the time of ovulation, okay? And after that, there's supposed to be a signal, a feedback loop that goes back to your pituitary saying, hey, now it's enough. Now you need to stop. And then the estrogen levels start to dip, and another hormone called progesterone starts to rise. So there is a communication between your pituitary and the ovary which has to be maintained for your menstrual cycle to occur normally. In the language of modern medicine, this whole thing is called as the hypothalamus pituitary ovarian axis. In short, the HPO axis. You can search for the HPO axis if you want to learn more. So any disruption in the HPO axis, either the pituitary is not triggered or it is triggered, but your ovary is not able to send the feedback, any sort of a disruption in this will disrupt your menstrual and reproductive health. Now think of a temple, a mokshadham, or a mantra which is meant for moksha, which works largely on the Agnya chakra and continuously activating your pituitary gland. And at that same rate of activation, your Swadhisthana is not being energized. So it is falling behind. So here your pituitary is causing testosterone to enter your bloodstream, but your ovaries are not able to convert all of it at that same rate. One of the conditions that happens is PCOS. And one of the symptoms with PCOS that we see is excess testosterone in the female body because the ovaries are not able to function at the same pace to transform that into estrogen, or the ovaries have become dysfunctional. And the other symptoms are masculine features. So the voice becomes more masculine. There is more facial hair among such women. Their personality becomes more driven by testosterone. That is, they become more aggressive in nature. I don't like to point this out, but if you observe one of the women who led the agitation for Sabrimala entry and fought and made that entry, just observe her personality. All of this I'm telling you will be there in her. That aggression and all of that is a result of the testosterone being so high, and unfortunately her body is not able to handle it. Now, it's very easy to blame women, to scold them, but we need to realize that this knowledge is not being made available to women. Our daughters, our sisters, even our mothers and our grandmothers know this through experience. But unless we are able to explain this, obviously questions will be asked. Are we to blame the women who are asking the questions, or are we all collectively responsible for not learning these sciences and not teaching our next generation these sciences? The restrictions pertaining to women in Sabrimala and other mokshadhams are simply this, that it will massively disrupt their menstrual and reproductive health. In response to my Sabrimala work, some women have foolishly, and I'm not I'm not being polite here, I'm saying foolishly asked me this question. So what? I don't want to menstruate. I don't want to have children. So what? I want to pursue moksha. In this life, your physical body is the tool for you to pursue the spiritual path. And if your physical health is not okay, you cannot pursue the spiritual path. If you're suffering from endometriosis, you're in severe pain. Don't think that menstruation is a button that you can just turn on and off and it will not affect anything else. You may have obesity because of hormonal disturbances. You may have PCOD. You may have extremely severe painful conditions. Your entire health for a woman rests on her menstrual health. Her mental health, her inner emotional stability is dependent on the stability of her menstrual cycle. So it is utter ignorance to say that I can do away with menstruation and I will be fine and I want to pursue moksha. The first thing to get right is your physical health, because your body is the vehicle for higher pursuits. If your body is disturbed, it's impaired, you cannot do anything else. Definitely, you cannot pursue the spiritual path. So many people then ask the question, which is a very valid question, that are you saying that women cannot pursue the spiritual path like men? They cannot do all that sadhana because we menstruate? That's a problem, right? No, the truth is that women need not do all that sadhana that men do. And the reason why men have to do all that sadhana is because they don't menstruate. It's the other way around. You see, we have feminist movements, instead of understanding the inherent superiority of women, they assume men are superior, and by being like men, you become superior. They've completely got it wrong. Whereas in the Indian tradition, it is the woman's body that was considered as the finer body, because it is so close to Shakti. It is Shakti. Every woman is considered as an embodiment of Devi, because just by virtue of having a female form, you don't need to do so much of the sadhana that men do. The reason that I am able to walk into a temple and experience the Chaitanyam there, the reason many women like me, very ordinary women who have not been initiated, who have not done sadhana, can have these intense experiences, is because our menstrual cycle gives us that sensitivity to these subtler energies. And for men to have the same level of sensitivity, they have to do a lot of sadhana, a lot of tapas. Just by virtue of your ability to menstruate, you can have so many of these experiences and learn these through the body itself, through the experience of your body. And as if that is not enough, there is menopause. And menopause is that other great gift where virtually without doing anything, the spiritual path just opens up for you. So that brings me to this mythological, I don't like to call it mythology, but let's just say this story that is there in many of our Puranas of why women menstruate. And the story is that Bhagwan Indra, he killed a Brahmana out of anger, and as a result of incurring the curse of killing a learned man, he did a lot of penance, but he could not rid himself of that guilt completely. So he requested the trees, the earth, the ocean, and women to take 1/4 of his guilt to free him from this sin. And all these four whom he approached agreed to it. And in return for taking his sin of, or his guilt of murdering a Brahmana, apparently there are different things that appear in it. For example, if you cut the tree, there is a sap, so on and so forth. And for women, it is said that as a result of incurring Bhagwan Indra's sin, women menstruate. So this is the typical interpretation. Who gives this interpretation? Men. Why? Because as hard as they try, they cannot look at menstruation as a positive experience. And I want to present a different sort of an understanding of this. I will not tell you to take my understanding as the final one, but I will tell you at least contemplate along these lines. So one of the interpretations by a very learned spiritual master, who even I have a lot of respect for, is that women by nature are very lusty. So what women asked in return, apparently, to Bhagwan Indra was that we should be able to experience sexual intimacy all through our life, and you give us that boon, and in turn we will take your sin. So Bhagwan Indra said okay, and as a result they menstruate, and therefore women are very lusty. I found this quite insulting to women, in spite of my respect for the spiritual master who said it. I do not agree with this interpretation, and I'll tell you why. The other interpretation is that Bhagwan Indra committed Brahma Hatya, which is the equivalent of Bhruna Hatya or infanticide. And it is murder. And essentially, when you menstruate, you are killing the possibility of a jiva being born. and that is a sin, and that is why women menstruate. This is another interpretation from a well-known author. I do not agree with that too, because yes, if menstruation is about not permitting life to be born, tell me, what is brahmacharya? In menstruation, at least, women have no choice. It is an involuntary removal of the egg. In brahmacharya, men are consciously choosing not to create life. How can you say that brahmacharya is a great virtue and menstruation is a sin? Isn't it? There can't be such contradictory ideas. Our Shastras were not contradictory. Our understanding of it is contradictory. So, how do we understand this? First of all, if women were doing a favor by taking away the sin of Bhagwan Indra, why will he give them a curse? He will give them a blessing, isn't it? So, what he gave them was the boon of menstruation, not the curse of menstruation, the boon of menstruation. So, if women asked him that what the basically the shloka uses the word kama, and that is why that particular spiritual reader said kama, he equated kama to sexual desire and said women are very lusty. But kama only means worldly desires. Sexual desire is one of those things. Worldly desire, basically bhukti. So, what women perhaps asked Bhagwan Indra was that they want mukti, but in addition to bhukti, they want to be able to have the path of worldly existence, of pursuing the worldly pleasures, but also mukti should be possible. Now, for that, he gave them a blessing and said that by virtue of menstruation, you can pursue both bhukti and mukti. Now, why is that? See, in the spiritual path, in the pursuit of mukti, conserving the human seed is everything. The human seed in women is the egg, and in men it is the sperm. So, brahmacharya and celibacy is so important for men in the spiritual path because they have to conserve that seed, and that is the seed which is transformed into subtler forms. But for women, that seed is released during menstruation. So, celibacy and that equivalent of brahmacharya is not needed for women because her processes are different thanks to menstruation. So women need not pursue brahmacharya. Women can have a married life or sexual life, and after menopause, those same aspects will be available to her because her seed is no longer released through menstruation. So both bhukti during menstruation and mukti during menopause is made possible to women, and this is the way I have understood Indra's story. It was not a result of them incurring Indra's sin. It was a blessing. It was a blessing given by Bhagwan Indra to women, and this is how the bigger idea of menstruation is, the spiritual idea. See, one of the texts talk about for women, no sadhana is needed because month on month, her menstrual blood takes away her sin. See, sin in the Hindu tradition is not this be good, do good, don't be good. Sin is anything that takes you away from moksha. One of the fundamental way of working towards moksha requires you to break the cycle, the karmic cycle of birth and rebirth. For men to do that, they practice brahmacharya and celibacy. For women, when you menstruate, you are breaking that cycle of birth and rebirth. By not allowing that seed to be born, you are breaking that cycle, and that's happening for you as part of the way you are. And that is why menstruation itself is a sadhana. Every time you menstruate, you have the capacity for being in a higher state. And that is why it is associated with so many spiritual practices and reverence itself. When you visit the Kamakya temple, you will understand this of how Devi in her time of menstruation is the most sought out because her powers of dissolution of life is the highest at that time, because menstruation is about breaking that karmic cycle. So all the sadhus and all the tantrics flock to Kamakya at the time of her menstruation because that is the time when she can very easily dissolve so many problems and help you break the cycle of birth and rebirth. And this is the deeper understanding of menstruation. Now, what I have said in this just about a little more than an hour, is just the tip of an iceberg. And the thing about such knowledge is that the more you understand it, the more you will realize that you know so little. So I think that is a good sign that we always realize how little we know, because there is so much more to know. And the source of these things is what we need to tap into. I would request that you do not limit your knowledge to this talk. If this is a subject that interests you, don't just limit it to even reading my book, Rutuvidya. Read the text referenced in that. There are many books on Tantra which are in English. For those who cannot read Sanskritam, you can read those texts also. I have mentioned the book Tantra Tattva, which is available in English. There are books of Sir John Woodroffe, who was a Britisher, but made immense effort to understand Tantra from the lens of the Hindu. His beautiful book, Shakti and Shakta, and the serpent power, which is about the chakras and the kundalini. You must read this to get a better understanding. If you can read Sanskritam, then there's an ocean of knowledge out there available for you to read and enjoy. And these are not books to be just read. Every round of your reading should be followed by contemplation to understand it, and then ground it in present reality. Whether it is a simple thing of going to a temple, start doing it with that jnanam, and you will learn much more than what you would by just reading books when you start putting those things into your day-to-day life and practice. With this, I will close my talk, and I'm open to taking any questions.
Very enlightening talk. Thank you. There were a lot of protests by women to be allowed inside Sabrimala temple, and I wish they would be educated. So your talk would definitely go a long way to educate all those and to remove the doubts that people have regarding Sabrimala. And if you could recommend some temples in Delhi, like the counterparts you have referred in the other parts of the country. So in Delhi, any such temple that you can recommend, and also are women above the age of 60 allowed to go to Sabrimala?
So the temple, not in Delhi, but the one that I have visited is the Kamakhya Devi temple in Guwahati. It is a must visit because you see, this is one temple where I could experience not just one or two chakras, but all chakras. That is the beauty of the Kamakhya Devi temple. You must visit there. Both bhukti and mukti is possible through Devi. And in tantras, that is how tantra is different from the other shastras. That if you approach Devi, she will basically take you by the hand and fulfill your karma by fulfilling all your desires, your pursuit of bhukti, and at the same time, she will also take you towards mukti. So all Devi temples are beautiful and must be visited. I have not personally explored Delhi enough to be able to suggest that, but any ancient temple anywhere is a great place to experience the chaitanyam and to see how it can affect you. Either you will know it directly by your first hand immediate effect, or you will know it as an after effect later on when you reflect on it. So look for the ancient temples. The older they are, and if they have been continuously in worship, the easier it is for you to experience the chaitanyam there. And about women in Shabrimala. So the age is set as 50 because it is assumed that after 50 or somewhere before that, women will reach menopause. But if you ask the traditional people who belong there, they'll say 7 years after menopause. You have to wait 7 years after menopause and only then go there. In fact, Arvindji, who guided my study on Shastra and Shabrimala, he told me this incident of this woman, a relative of his, who had just attained menopause, and she said, "Oh, it's enough. I want to go to Ayappa." And she went on that journey, and she started bleeding again. So that's when he reminded me again that it's not just menopause. You have to wait 7 years after menopause to make sure that you're done with that phase, and ideally after that is when you should visit Shabrimala.
I have two questions actually. Ma'am, you said that ladies need not take any of it because like I quote from what you said. You said that they release their sins through the menstrual process itself, and it's easy to do attain mukti, whereas men have to do the sadhanas because they cannot menstruate. Ma'am, but then why do we worship this Brahmacharini Devi on the second day of Navratri, ma'am? It said that this lady did tapasyas and all that, and that I've also heard somewhere that before, like I quote from that, before even women could be brahmacharinis and all that, and later as the society became quote unquote patriarchal, that women were barred from studying. So can you explain more about this Brahmacharini Devi? And the second question is how to respond to those trolls who keep deriding this as pseudoscience. That's all.
And I'll not claim that I know the exact answer, but I will tell you what I know, and I would urge you to study further yourself. So, all the Devis in Navratri we worship are associated with each chakras. So, Brahmacharini is associated with, tell me which chakra? You know, if I'm not wrong, it is the Swadhisthana chakra. And the Swadhisthana chakra has to do with your reproductive health itself. Okay, so through the Navaratri celebrations, the Devis that are there, they represent the different phases of a woman. So Brahmacharini represents that phase just prior to or menarche, something like that. So it is very much connected and associated with the menstruation. And before menarche is that period of what they say Brahmacharini, which is celibacy. So in ancient India, a woman's marriage, a girl's marriage, was considered after she attained menarche. The period before that was for her the brahmacharya phase. So it is a natural thing. It is not about brahmacharya now. In fact, if you talk of the ashramas, Tantra Shastra says that all those four ashramas do not apply in the Kali Yuga. And brahmacharya does not apply here because people can't do it fully. The mistake is we often think brahmacharya is just about physical celibacy. And that's what we have come to relate it to. It is not just physical celibacy. It is also a lot of associated sadhana that goes into it to tune your mind more towards the path of moksha, of the nivritti marg. So women can take to it. It's not that they cannot. It is just that they need not. That is not a must or a criteria for them. If they want to, they're more than welcome to. They're more than welcome to. But it is a different process for women. Women embody Shakti, women embody Devi. And the whole aspect of Devi in Tantra is that she fulfills your bhukti and she takes you to mukti. Now, somehow the conversations on spirituality have been led by men. And the thought has always been that you have to be against the worldly life or leave one in order to pursue the other. But what Tantra teaches us is that, in fact, in Tantra, is the interesting thing that if you choose a woman as the guru, if a woman becomes the guru, your blessings are 8 times more. So if the mother is the guru, you're blessed 8 times more because it's so much more easier to reach moksha through Devi and through a woman and a woman's body, which represents Devi. So that is what I understand of it. You can delve into a little more deeply. Other question about trolls. My thing is, why do you want to respond to it? Our life should not be about responding to criticism. Our life and our journey should be about understanding things for what it is. If I made my work about simply responding to someone's criticism, there's no way that I could have understood things in the way in which I have understood it. And somewhere all of our learning has been truncated because we are only responding to social media comments and posts. We are not studying things beyond that. To know something in depth, to teach others, you must always go deeper. And you can only go deeper when you close your Facebook account. so, so I'm just kidding. But what I'm saying is spend lesser time on answering others. Spend more time on answering yourself. We must question, we must debate, we must argue. But first, those debates, those questions, those arguments should be to ourselves. Spend restless, sleepless nights arguing with yourself about what is the answer to this? Why am I not able to understand it? Not to answer others, just for my own understanding. Okay, because when you know it, they say, no, the truth will set you free. It really does. Because when you finally find those answers, you will not even bother about responding to those trolls because those people don't matter. They don't matter. What matters is how deeply you have understood it and what you decide to do with it. Don't make your life about responding to criticism. Please don't do that. Thank you for the question.
I have actually a lot of questions, but first, a confirmation sort of. I have heard you in one of your YouTube videos saying that if we are in connection with the earth and the moon, then all the women in this world will bleed together. Will have their menstrual cycle together. So I was just wondering when will be that day or something. So my guess is, according to the Indian calendar, the Ekadashi and finishing at Amavasya, because Amavasya is when the new moon starts and new cycle should begin. So is that right, or is it some other?
Thank you, Shreya, for that great question. And the answer is not so straightforward. If Sangam Talks gives me another hour, I will explain that. so, so I have covered this particular aspect of how women's cycles are influenced by the larger cycles in one of the chapters in my book, Rutu Vidya. And to understand this, we need the knowledge of not just of Ayurveda, but also of, especially of Jyotisha Shastra. Okay, that is our Jyotisha Shastra is our science of astrology and astronomy. Now, in the ancient text of Brihad Jataka, it is mentioned that women's cycles, they are not just influenced by the moon cycles. The popular thing is to say moon cycle, right? But there is another planet which actually bears a huge impact on women's cycles. And I have always thought about this, that within a woman's body, Ayurveda will explain how when the Pitta dosha and the Vata dosha naturally rise, it creates a case where women menstruate. In the Earth's atmosphere, in our environment, when there are seasons where Pitta dosha and Vata dosha are naturally high, which is our summer season, the seasons of Jeshta and Ashad as per the lunar calendar, that's when we celebrate Kamakhya Devi's menstruation, because that is the time when Mother Earth is said to menstruate. And to your question, after I visited Kamakhya temple, every month in June, my period would coincide with those days, those 4 days of Kamakhya Devi's menstruation, which is called Ambubachi. And it is my guess that typically all the women in that surrounding of that Kamakhya temple would menstruate in at least in that month at the same time, because a major syncing happens of our cycles. Similarly, in Orissa, there is the Rajaparba festival, where again 3-4 days of leave is given to women, because at that time, en masse, a lot of our cycles would start to sync and come together. Now, Jyotisha Shastra will tell you, just like how within our body there is a time when Pitta dosha is high and you menstruate. In the earth, there is a time when Pitta dosha is high and the earth menstruates. Like that, there is a planet whose influence will cause this increase of Pitta. That planet is Mangal or Mars. Okay, so there is something known as a Hora, Hora, Hora. If you look at any astrology website and you look for a daily Hora, it will tell you in a day of 24 hours, every hour, which is the planet which has a more influence. So if you look at the Hora of Mars, there will be 2 or 3 Horas of Mars in a day. The day when you menstruate, that 1 hour when Mars influence is more, that will typically be the time when your period starts. Start observing this. It is very interesting, and I was stunned by the way month after month, the time when you have your period is the time when there is a Hora of Mars. Okay, so moon influences the bodily fluids in a woman's body and her emotions, and Mars influences the blood. So it's a combination of the influence of moon and Mars that results in menstruation. And this is something which is explained in the Jyotisha Shastra. Although we keep time looking at the moon because the moon has clear phases and it's easy to measure and we have lunar calendar, the moon itself is influenced by the cycles of the sun. Those are the ayanas, the Dakshinayana and the Uttarayana. So women's menstruation is not one fixed pattern. It moves as it moves through the ayanas. So if you are bleeding closer to Amavasya or new moon during Uttarayana, then after the summer solstice, sometime in June 21st, which coincidentally is when Devi Kamakya also menstruates, after that solstice, when you move to Dakshinayana, your cycle will go to the other side and you will start bleeding closer to Purnima. And then the reverse happens. You come towards Dakshinayana, and when you shift from Dakshinayana to Uttarayana, again your cycle will shift from being closer to Purnima to closer to Amavasya. Because your cycle is also not steady, no, it moves. So it takes 2 years to complete this one cycle. So in January 2020, if my period was close to Amavasya, next in January 2021, it will be close to Purnima. And then 2022, again, it will be close to Amavasya. So it takes 2 years to do this one cycle. And I have showed in my book how you can chart this astrologically, and you can actually make a good prediction of when your next cycle will be through the Rashi chart. So how you can do all of that is there in my book. But this is not so simple. It's a very vast science, and basics of Jyotisha Shastra should be understood to understand this. When will we all start bleeding together is the question. Now, wherever the sun's influence is the same in a particular geographic location, there the possibilities of women in that region bleeding together are there. Even if you see our lunar our calendars, our Indian calendars, the Bengali calendar is different from the Karnataka or the Malayalam calendar. Because here the month is considered from Amavasya and there it's considered from Purnima. So there's a 15-day difference in the month itself. So the way the sun influences every region is different. In Tamil Nadu, there is a village where for that village, they have a separate calendar based on the sunrise and the moonrise of that village. Tamil Nadu is all about precision. So even in this, they are very precise of, in my village, I have a separate calendar and this is my truth because this is how the sun is in my village. So we knew those things according to that precision. If you know that precision, you will know that women in that region on whom the sun's influence is in the same way should bleed in the same manner. But artificial lighting will spoil that for a lot of us. We have to do away with electricity if we have any hopes for that.
Yes. This has been one of the most profound talks. You're like a guru. I think you should switch your careers. Kamakya Devi and earth menstruating, what does that really mean? Why does the earth, last time in the last talk you mentioned you're releasing Ama. Okay, that I understand is a human body because of bad eating and all of that. So how does a Devi temple, why does the Devi have to menstruate and how does the earth have to menstruate? So that's question one. Maybe you want to answer that and then we'll go on to the next one.
I don't know about a guru, but I'm a woman, and in the Tantra Shastra, in the Kali Yuga, if you're a woman, it is something. And woman can experience a lot through her body. I think all women can experience what I have. Your question about Kamakya and the earth's menstruation. Again, in this given time, it's difficult for me to elaborate on it, but I have written a very detailed chapter on this in my book, Ritu Vidya. But there are two ways of looking at it. One is the way which we try to apply our logic and reasoning and understand, and the other is the spiritual significance of Ma Kamakya's menstruation. The logical way of understanding and looking at it is when we shift, when the solstice happens. So Ma Kamakya's menstruation and those 4 days of Ambubachi happen around the summer solstice, which is typically around June 21st. Around that time, all our bodies go through an internal thermoregulation. Okay, in the seasons, if you look at it, this is the time of the Grishma Kala. The Grishma Kala, or what we are calling the summer season. The summer solstice is the hottest day. And this is the time where, when you understand it from the perspective of doshas, the earth has a predominance of the Vayu and the Agni Panchamahabhutas. And as a consequence, if you want to understand it, of Vata dosha and Pitta dosha. So within a woman's body, when Vayu and Agni are at higher state, women menstruate. So in the earth, when Vayu and Agni are at a predominant state, we have the menstruation of Devi Kamakya. So the rational, logical way of looking at it is that this entire festival of Ambubachi, of celebrating the period of Mother Earth, was this representative of this time in the Earth's atmosphere where all our bodies are going through this internal thermoregulation, which happens to women when we menstruate. Okay, there is a major shift that is happening, and that is why you take 3 or 4 days off, you don't do anything. And in fact, even the temple is closed at that time because Devi's power of will be too high for normal people to bear. In spite of it, and I visited the temple during just after Ambubachi because I had my period during the 4 days of Ambubachi. So the day my period ended and Ambubachi ended, I was there in Guwahati. There were 25 lakh devotees. You cannot even enter the temple, but just seated around that temple were 25 lakh devotees, tantric sadhus. They come from all kinds of places, flock there because that is the time. See, there are some times where naturally, if you do even a little sadhana, you will experience. Devi Kamakya's menstruation is one such time because the earth is in that state where the powers of dissolution, of ending this karmic cycle of birth and rebirth are at its highest. That is why just visiting there will do that for sadhus and tantrics. That is a spiritual understanding of it. See, Ma Kamakya is not a Devi in the sense that she is not. See, in that same hill where she resides called Neelachal, there are the shrines of the Dasa Mahavidyas also, the 10 wisdom goddesses, so to speak. Okay, there are all of them, but the rule is that you must first go to Ma Kamakya and only then to all the other shrines. Why is that there? Because Ma Kamakya is not Devi in a manifest form. She is Mahamaya. That is the unmanifest form of the cosmos. The first reason, the cause of all the causes. And that is why there's no vigraham of hers. She's represented as the yoni, the channel through which life is born. And that same yoni is the channel for taking back that life, for dissolution, or in other words, for moksha. So the spiritual significance of Kamakya is that it is the place of bhukti at all times and also bhukti, because it's the same yoni that creates life that can also dissolve life. So she is not in one of her manifested forms in Kamakya. She's not just Devi alone there. She is Mahamaya there. And you can experience it. Your whole body will throb in that region. You cannot miss it. However blunt a person you are, you step into that place with all the noise and all the chaos. You can go into a meditative state like this. And more than this, I should not even say because I would like you to learn through your experience. On that day where there were 25 lakh devotees, it wasn't even possible for us to go till the yoni and have the darshan because of the crowds. It is impossible to get a chance. But I managed to find a corner in the temple and sit there, just to sit there and observe what is happening. I won't even call it meditation because there were children running around, there were animals being sacrificed, and so many things. But just sit there and close your eyes, you can experience sensations there so prominently. It's an experience that all of us should do it. Any temple that you want to understand, Rahulji, the best way of doing it is to spend time there. Not just go and take the prasadam and come back. Just sit there with your eyes closed, and everything that you want to know will be revealed to you. And that's the most beautiful and profound way. And when you know it like that, even though you may not have the words to always articulate it, you will know it. It will answer so many questions at once. And I would suggest that you attempt that sort of a knowing sometime.
Thank you. So very, very profound. So basically all of human life in this talk has been sort of interwoven so beautifully into a search for moksha. That's the entire purpose of human life and the Hindu view of life. It seems to be. There is basically nothing else, but the whole temples and all of the reason for human beings born is moksha itself. So very profound. On energies, yes, I've experienced that in several places, most prominently in the Adi Shankaracharya's birthplace in Kerala, the Chinmaya Foundation, and in Shankara Hill in Srinagar. very, very powerful. But I never have been able to find out one chakra or whatever. But just you just feel your whole body thumping, or at the Isha Yoga Center in the Shivalinga. That brings me to the second point on Kamakhya Devi being a yoni, which is not true, so sort of connected with your talk. The whole idea of Shivalinga and yoni is mocked at very often. I know you mentioned do not respond to criticism, but unfortunately, this whole barrage of idol worship and then going down to as if it's phallus and vagina worship, So, what do you have to say to that? Orientalists or Westerners view it as anthropomorphism, which is to put human ideas onto ideas of God. Do you have a comment on this, please?
I'll give a little bit of what I know, Rahul J. I'm not going to say that I know a lot. So the whole of the temples are as per, the ancient temples are as per the Agama texts. Now, who's the author of the Agama texts? The author is said to be none other than Shiva himself. So the Agama has come as a result of the questions asked by Parvati, and while giving those answers, whatever Shiva has said, that is what is there in the Agama text. And it is as per those instructions that temples today have been constructed. Now, there is also in Tantra Shastra the reverse. That is, Devi is the guru, and she's the one who answers, and Shiva is the Shishya, and he asks. And those texts are called as the Nigamas. And those have to do with the Rahasya Puja and so on. The unfortunate thing is that people have limited the understanding of Tantra and therefore to whatever else you are referring to as the understanding of it in the human body. So whatever is our tiny little intellect, with this tiny intellect, we have tried to understand profound things. And therefore, Tantra as well as the yoni and the linga have come to be associated as sexual symbols alone. First thing, even if it is that, so what? Tantra tells you that the most precious thing you have within you is your human seed. In women, the seed is contained in your menstrual blood. In men, it is contained in semen. And in one form of Tantra, offering these as worship, symbolically, mentally, is the highest you can offer because you're offering back that seed. You are, by offering back the seed, you are breaking the karmic cycle. Okay, so your seed is understood like that, not as this gross physical form of sexual organs, but as that potential in you through which you can reach the highest state. The beauty of Tantra is that it takes the most base emotion of humans in the Kali Yuga of sexuality and uses even that to put you on the path of moksha. So in the Kali Yuga, people understand only sexuality and sexual energy. Okay, let's work with that. That's the beauty of it. The misinterpretation is that in the West, they think that Tantra is some esoteric ritual which will help you attain sexual climax. That is not what Tantra is. Tantra will teach you to channelize sexual energy as a sadhana for a spiritual purpose, and there are very clear instructions of who it is not for. It is not for one who they call the Pashu, that is, one who is not able to arise above their base animal instincts. It is not for them. You should have mastered a certain maturity in your mind to go beyond these base instincts, and only then you can even pursue all these sadhana. That's one. Now, the representation of the yoni and the linga, if you have to even ask, why do we always get into this mode of defending? I'm asking you, what is wrong with it? What is wrong with representing the core of ourselves, of our seed, and of celebrating that? Does that not speak of a culture which revered sexuality rather than reducing it to nothing more than sexual intercourse, which is what the West does? If anything, you should wonder at how is it that the ancient Hindus, who you think are orthodox and religious and idol worshippers, were so forward thinking? That is the question that should even come, if it does come. Of course, it's all twisted. Tantra will tell you that the kumkuma, the red kumkuma that you wear, is in fact symbolic of the female seed which is contained in the menstrual blood. And the vibhuti that you wear is symbolic of the male seed which is contained in the semen. So, what you are wearing is your core seed, because the Tantra says there is nothing greater that you can offer to Shiva than your own seed. There's no bigger offering. All the balis that you do, all the pujas, all the sadhana, it apparently fades in comparison to the offering of the seed itself. And this understanding has been simplified when we represent the yoni and the linga. Now, the Tantra Shastra is there for the Kali Yuga for a reason. It is your shortest path to mukti. And when the path is the shortest, it is also the trickiest. The chances of getting deviated, of getting confused, of getting lost are many. And that is why we need a guru. There is that play with the sexual energy, because your core, all of your energies is basically your sexual energy, and transforming that is what the sadhana and tantra does. So what if those symbols are there? It is nothing to be ashamed of, and nothing we should even bother to want to defend. We should take pride that yes, we are a culture that understood the value of the human seed, not for your material purpose, but for realizing it spiritually. And yes, we represented it like the yoni and the linga. Too bad that you are too ashamed to talk about sexuality except in the base form. I think that is what we should tell them. Why do we get defensive, Rahulji? I fail to understand that. Why do we think? We have such a beautiful concept, and everything that we pick, anything you pick in the Hindu tradition, there's so much depth and beauty to it. Why are we going on defending as if we're doing something wrong?
One reason for that is simply that we don't know enough. And I guess part of our whole work is to help all these narratives come out, all this knowledge come out. So one time, maybe another talk on a little, maybe a little deeper on Murti Puja and the other aspect of Agama Shastras would be very nice coming from you. Maybe another time.
So there is one question that popped up in my chat about the author of Tantra Tattva. So I would like to just repeat it if someone wants to make a note. It's Pandit Shiva Chandra Vidyarnava. Pandit Shiva Chandra Vidyarnava is the author of the Tantra Tattva. In archives.com, who I credit as my source of all these books, you can download it for free. There's a wonderful introduction in this book by Sir John Woodroffe. And it's a Tantra Tattva is the principles of Tantra, the core of what is Tantra Shastra. That is what Pandit Shiva Chandra Vidyarnava explains in this book. It's a beautiful book and a great book to start reading and understanding Tantra. Thank you, Ramji.
Sinuji, you spoke about the energy of places. So without knowing, without having any knowledge, and without having this, number one, first, where do we North Indians stand? Because we have all these modern day constructed temples in residential areas which look like departmental stores because there are gods lined up in a row. So I don't think there are any ancient temples over here. Do you know of any?
I wouldn't know specifics, but Guwahati and Kamakya temple is that. You have a lot of Kali temples in West Bengal. Madhya Pradesh has so many of these ancient temples. So I don't think there's any dearth of temples. It's just that you need to be willing to see it. And any temple where the Agama traditions have been followed for Prana Pratishtha will have the Chaitanyam that you can experience. The more older the temple, the easier you can experience the Chaitanya. Now, what you said, race is an important question, because there are some sects. For example, in Karnataka, there is a sect called as the Lingayats, and they are followers of Basavanna. And he was a reformist. So the temples of Basavanna do not have a typical Prana Pratishtha done. It is just an idol, and the idea was to promote equality and be good, do good, similar to what is taught in a Gurudwara. So in places where the Prana Pratishtha is not done, these rules don't apply. So initially, Lingayat women used to ask me, but in our temples, we can go even when we have our period. We are so forward. That was the thinking. And later I realized that it is not forward, backward sort of a thing. Wherever the prana pratishtha has been done, there will be rules there that have to be followed. Even in a gurudwara, since the prana pratishtha is not done, it is open. Even women who are menstruating can go. So what you need to look for is spaces where prana pratishtha has happened, and that is there across India. I will not be able to point out, but definitely we have so many Devi temples in spread across North India, and you can look it up and visit. Yeah.
Without knowing anything about Tantra, I have experienced these things in certain places. One of the very prominent ones is the Kankhal Samadhi temple of Anandmayi Ma.
Thank you very much, Sinuji, for that informative talk, and especially about the knowledge of chakras and energy centers. There are a lot of traditions that are now being revived, like Sri Vidya, etc., that are mainly seated in the south, where Devi worship is sort of the main tenet. A part of it, a lot of the male sadhaks are advised to invoke a lot of feminine energies to balance the energies out, the Shiva and Shakti conjunction, and also inspire a lot of creative influences. But the reason I raise this is for a topic that you raised, which a lot of urban women suffer from today, which is PCOS and PCOD, right? It causes a lot of trauma in terms of the manifestations of these particular, I won't call them diseases, but afflictions. And pharmaceutical or medical intervention can only do so much. And it's like a never-ending cycle of medicines and hirsutism and a lot of trauma that these women have to face in their 20s and 30s. Let alone the fertility issues that emanate based on it. So what would be your suggestions or recommendations on how best to deal with it?
Straight away, in answer to the question about PCOS or PCOD, the main thing about our culture is to work on prevention. Okay, so many of the regulations that exist, it is to prevent these problems, including the very clothing that women wear. See, in PCOD, as I explained, the ovaries over a period of time become dysfunctional or less energized. One thing is, as I mentioned, if only your higher chakras are triggered, there isn't enough prana going to your lower chakras and therefore your reproductive organs. The other thing with clothing is that if you wear clothes that are very tight in the pelvic region, for example, you wear denim jeans which are very tight, then you will reduce the blood flow to the ovaries. And one of the reasons why there's a predominance of PCOS among urban girls and women compared to rural is simply the way we dress. So the more you change the way you dress, that is to wear clothing or to avoid doing things that will reduce the flow of blood to the ovaries. Your pelvic area has to be allowed that freedom of oxygen, of blood reaching it, and having enough prana in it, and that does not happen when you wear tight clothing. So the sari or the salwar kameez, the reason this is the preferred clothing traditionally is that you allow your organs to breathe and you don't constrict them. That is one thing of prevention. And of course, so many of the rules that exist in our tradition are about prevention. Now, those rules are not followed, and so many women are having PCOS, PCOD. So, what is the treatment? Ayurveda does have treatment. I have seen many women recover from PCOD from conditions similar to endometriosis through Ayurveda. The challenge is to find the right kind of Vaidya. In Ayurveda, those who come from a family of practitioners, family of Vaidyas, whose fathers and grandfathers were Vaidyas and they have learned from them, those is who I would recommend, because today's education system teaches you more of modern science and they force you to look at Ayurveda through the lens of modern science. So we've reduced Ayurveda to, instead of synthetic drugs, you have herbal drugs. That is what we think Ayurveda is. But Ayurveda is a knowledge of the Sukshma Sharira. The true Ayurveda Vaidya will be able to do your Nadi Pariksha, to hold your pulse and tell you everything that is wrong with your doshas and how to correct it. That is how you will know. If an Ayurveda doctor sits with a stethoscope and starts, then I think you can take your leave. So finding the right Vaidya who comes from the family of Vaidyas is very important. But the first step, always remember, our tradition and our culture was about preventing disorders. So following the cultural practices alone does wonders for preventing disorders. In our ancient days, especially if you see women in Kerala and Tamil Nadu, it was a daily practice that you wake up, you will go to the nearest Devi temple. You will start your day by taking bath, going to the Devi temple. A good occasion, your birthday or whatever, you'll start by going to the Devi temple. And when women regularly visited these temples, except the time when they're menstruating, very naturally their health was taken care of. Because these temples work to correct your Muladhara and Swadhisthana chakras. So one of the things that women should start doing is making it a habit, a happy habit, to daily visit your nearest Devi temple. And villages had that, you had the Grama Devata temple at a walkable distance. So every villager would first thing in the morning visit the Devi before they start the day. Urban women don't have that luxury, but we should also try and find something. But all of these are towards prevention. And I think the focus on prevention needs to be more for PCOS and PCOD, which, by the way, modern medicine does not have the answers for. They don't explain why it happens. They don't explain what to do when it happens. The treatment will always have other side effects. So the treatment that is there is also insufficient. So prevention is a big thing. And if it has happened, finding the right Ayurveda Vaidya and taking their help will go a long way in curing PCOD. Over a period of time, you have to have patience with Ayurveda because it requires you to change your lifestyle, your way of thinking, the way of being. You should be willing to work on yourself. And that is when Ayurveda will work beautifully for you.
I was told that in the passing by somebody who was vaguely interested in Tantra, that it is very easy for you to get deep into meditation when you're menstruating. In my experience, like a beginner, how I related it to was that when you visit these places, your heart chakra opens, or your heart opens, or the more you practice, your heart opens. And how I went on with it was also that we had some practice called Women's Temple. There is a group, you might know of it, where some kind of shamanic practices and all, where we were taught to honor our womb. It started with honor your womb, honor your hips, honor your breasts. And we had these rituals where other stuff, shamanic stuff. When I started doing that, when I actually started honoring my feminine side, the feminine inside me, I discovered that I became more and more unapologetic. The heart open. Sometimes you're taken wrongly, sometimes you're interpreted in a wrong way because I don't know, because of whatever societal this thing, but you just become more and more unapologetic. You just become more and more unafraid. My question is that, does any of these linkages, do they make sense? Because we grew up in a very conditioned way, being a Buddhist, being a half, Catholic conditioning, Victorian values. So we were taught to be apologetic about all these things.
I know that in the absence of a rooting in the Hindu tradition and culture, women tend to look at whatever they can grasp and hold on to. So, living in India, we talk of shamanic practices, uh, where we have our own culture which revered the yoni, which celebrated the feminine. That's okay. It doesn't matter what path you choose and what you do. It's all right. You need to understand this about menstruation. One of the Indian language terms for it is Rajaswala, which means a time when the quality of Rajas is flowing out of you. So women by nature are more Rajasic because we tend more towards having an action-oriented life. We're always acting, we're always doing things. But menstruation is the time when this quality of Rajas naturally leaves you. When the quality of Rajas leaves you, you are left with two other options. One is the quality of Sattva, which is your higher harmonizing quality. And the other is the quality of Tamas, which might take you towards certain inertia or laziness. Based on your disposition, either of these two can happen. So when you're menstruating, either it is a possibility where you can invoke and be in a state where Sattva Guna is more in you, or you can take to just sleeping, lazing around, feeling tired, which is your predominance of tamas. So why menstruation was revered and why it is considered as such an easy sadhana is because very naturally for women during this time, rajas, that thing which we try to stop with all the sadhana. Very naturally, that is leaving you. Very naturally, you have the ability to go into a sattvic state. You can go into a tamasic state also, but at least the possibility of going into a sattvic state is there. And that is why menstruation is considered like that. Now, when you are doing these different practices, whether it is from shamanic tradition or others, you must bear one thing in mind, that it should not alter your inner vayus. For example, why are you told not to utter any mantras? Because it could have an effect on the apana vayu and you should not affect it. Why are you told not to do any inverted asanas? Because if you do an inverted asana, your apana itself will become inverted. You are even told not to sit in dhyana or to focus on something. Because when you are in that state, your energies will naturally tend to move towards your higher chakras. So we may not be adepts at meditation, so it is okay if you sit still and close your eyes. But dhyana, as we know it in yoga, should also not be pursued during menstruation. See, the beauty of the Hindu tradition is that whatever today we are calling symbolic, no, they were all techniques. They were all techniques with deep science, which can work for you if you did it the way it is meant to be done. Whereas most of what Westerners try to do in the name of honoring feminine, these are all symbolic. They also have a role. They play with your mind. They make you feel good about things. It is one way of going about it. And there's no harm in doing it. But the Hindu culture is more than symbolic. So when in the Hindu tradition, they tell you, don't do something, it is not out of respect for the deity or things like that. It is because that will have a direct impact on your body. So whatever practices that you're doing through other cultures also, try to understand how it impacts your sukshma sharira. The reason why in the Hindu tradition, menstruating women are told, don't do anything, just rest, do nothing, is because there are certain activities that are happening in your sukshma sharira which should not be disturbed in any way. And just remaining in that natural state will cause the rajas to leave you. And if you are not tending towards the tamas, automatically you will go to a sattvic state. It is that easy, basically. I hope I've given you some pointers, if not answered.
Yeah, many pointers. Just two little bits of information. One, you spoke about the temple, which is famous for this, which works on the pancreas and blood sugar. Which was the name of the temple?
If my pronunciation is right, then it's the Venni Karumbeshwar temple. Venni, Venni Karumbeshwar. It's a Shiva temple in Tamil Nadu. You can Google it. Information is there about it.
And second, about
for the temple for diabetes in Tamil Nadu, then it will appear. Yeah.
Second was about Vibhuti. You said Vibhuti is symbolic of the man's seed. I was told that Vibhuti was symbolic of the ashes of the cremation ground. So Vibhuti means nivritti, like somebody told me, don't wear Vibhuti before you go for an exam because that means ki tum chhod rahe ho vairagya. So not sure
so
about that.
The all of Shiva is about vairagya only, no? See, the thing is that just like we among humans, we think I am Sinu, you are someone, he is Rahul, she is Tanya. We've made so many differences. So between our Devi Devatas also we are differentiating. Kali is different from Shiva, we say. Kali and Kala are the same. Okay, so the whole aspect of Kali, of cremation, is dissolution of life. And that is the same aspect that is there with Shiva. Shiva is also about dissolution of life. When you are pursuing mukti, it is Shiva that you will be drawn to. You know, the reason why I say that mokshadhams are not for everyone is because I know of people who were just so drawn to this aspect of Shiva temples, and one after the other started visiting these mokshadhams. They were people who were very much engaged in material world and living, and they suddenly developed this vairagya. And one of them, who I know, actually passed away before her time. That whole year, she just visited one after the other Shiva temples. We also know a similar thing of Sadhguru's wife. This is, of course, there in the public domain, of how much before her age, when she was still very young and had a young daughter, she took to that path, and just giving up physical life became a very natural thing. She was drawn towards dissolution of life. Right? So those ideas are there. So it is not to be taken lightly and not to be discussed also in such a forum, but somehow somehow I end up discussing these things. So Vibhuti, yes, it represents dissolution. Shiva represents dissolution. Kali represents dissolution. The human seed represents the dissolution of life itself. So it's not different.
My question is, wouldn't you recommend, or shouldn't we all put some kind of pressure on the government to have these sciences put in our school books instead of sexual education? Because it would put the minds who are really in a phase of learning, a very young mind, it would channelize their energies in the right manner, would make them more creative, and take them to the path of religious and worldly um, aspirations or achievements in a dharmic way. Thank you.
Thank you. And yes, I completely agree with you that our sciences needs to become part of our education curriculum. But you see, expecting that it will happen through the government is a really long shot. Uh, I have spoken and written so much about Sabrimala, and none of it has reached the ears, or it has reached their ears and somehow bounced out or reflected back. See, we must understand government structures work in a different way. They are answerable to bodies and entities which know nothing about our sciences. The Supreme Courts itself know nothing about our sciences. So they can't overnight introduce these topics or this language. If you look at the aspect of health, even with menstruation, I have been telling our Honorable Prime Minister unfortunately distributed sanitary napkins and was greatly applauded for it by all the UNICEFs and WHOs and everything, and they are answerable to these kind of people. So instead, if he says, I will not give sanitary napkins, but we will start introducing Rutu Vidya as a subject, no one's going to understand that. So it's going to be, I doubt if I will see it happen in my lifetime. But as you said, I completely agree that this needs to become part of our education curriculum. But the route need not be the government. You and I can take this up. Channels like this very channel can take up this aspect of educating our children about these sciences. And when the masses know it, then it becomes the law. So I would say that this approach is little, at least more in our hands. It's not in my hands, at least to influence the government. But this, what we are doing now, you and I, this is in our hands. Let's build this community of women who teach the next generation, and let's do it through such channels.